Hello everyone, hope you're all well and thanks very much for all the support with my videos, the likes, shares, comments. I'm very grateful to everybody who supports me through buying me a coffee and everybody who has subscribed to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much for all your support, I very much appreciate it. Today I want to speak about what's been going on here in Ireland. Now today we had a visit of Christine Lagarde. Lagarde is the head of the European Central Bank and former head of the IMF, former French finance minister who steered France through the tribulations of the financial crash. And because of her great response for the big corporate interests and the bankers, she got the top job in the IMF and then has moved on to the European Central Bank. And famously in an interview in Ireland last year on a chat show with an unnamed host, we all know who it was, a so-called entertainment show, but less said the better about the scandal that RTE is been facing for many years. But she said in that interview that inflation came out of nowhere. Well, this is an untrained economist, Christine Lagarde, and inflation came out of the magic money tree that's always been printed called quantitative easing. It came out of the supply line lockdowns, politically mandated lockdowns that decimated small businesses, created the biggest transfer of wealth towards the billionaires, that incidentally we're still waiting for a public inquiry here in Ireland about. No talk of that with the Irish media. And also the huge profiteering that's taken place. But again, Christine would like us to believe that inflation came out of nowhere. It just happened. A huge devaluation of ordinary people's money, and more people in Ireland are being forced into poverty, as today latest figures have reported a huge increase in the incidence of poverty, especially amongst younger children. Now, with the reports today coming from the Children's Rights Alliance, said that 1 in 5 children are now in poverty in Ireland. Huge increase of more children in forced deprivation, up to 260,000 children in forced deprivation. And which essentially means 1 in 5 children were living in households unable to afford basic goods. Now we see that with the huge amount of costs of accommodation forcing more and more people into poverty. And yeah, well done Christine Lagarde. Inflation came out of nowhere, and the profiteering that goes on in your European Central Bank and your European Union project that due to the bailout that said that Ireland could not build any more public housing. We have currently about 7% of our housing stock is seen as social stroke public housing, one of the lowest in Europe. And as well, this has been about the market approach, where we see a huge transfer of public money into private hands in the form of rent assistance that's making the rich richer rather than be pushed into public housing. And this was one of the conditions of the so-called bank bailout, which saddled Ireland with over 43% of the total European banking debt. So yeah, the neoliberal dream is working well in the European Union, as 1 in 5 children are now in poverty, huge amounts in Ireland, down to this neoliberal mad project that's continuing apace in Ireland. Now, because it's interesting, over the next couple of days, and actually in Killarney at the moment, there is a global economic summit being held. And who's going to attend this is quite interesting, because the Prime Minister of Ukraine is going to address this conference in the next couple of days. Ex-Prime Minister, of Ukraine is going to address it, probably looking for more money, more investment. Recently it was stated that by Michael McGrath, Finance Minister here in Ireland, that we would have to pay more into the European Union to get the same level of social public services. And we can see the devastating level of public services in Ireland. Most notably, I just mentioned the housing. We know the health disaster, with nearly 1 million people on hospital waiting lists. And the idea now is to pay more money in, more arms, more weapons, into the European Union budget, bigger defence budget, rather than spend the money on what people basically need to exist a dignified life. But of course, this is part of the EU push, and this is happening through this global economic summit they're having in the next number of days. And actually, interestingly enough, another guest is attending virtually. It's Dr. Tedros, the famous head of the World Health Organization, trying to push forward this pandemic treaty as well. Coincidentally, he is attending virtually at this summit. So the loss of sovereignty continues apace in Ireland, with our masters bowing down to the masters in Brussels for the political establishment. But this has always been the agenda of the European Union, and always been the agenda towards the more devolution of power towards technocratic elites such as the European Central Bank, as I said, and the World Health Organization. And this has been copper-fastened since the early 90s with the Maastricht Treaty, which brought the market freedoms to the fore and the structural and democratic deficit also to the fore. And it also worked to favour the domestic and international elites, where the movement of capital was moved freely, but again, people were the ones who carried the can. And it had European Union law supersedes national law as well, and the drive towards a single currency, which offered a financial straitjacket on the people here in Ireland and nationally all across the European Union. And we've seen the political direction of the European Union through the neoliberal project, where it led to deregulation of capital markets, low trade barriers, if any, with all these trade agreements. We saw it with the TTIP agreements with CETA, and the Mercosur deal that's going on currently with Brazil. We see the cheap Brazilian beef coming across as the Brazilians are chopping down rainforests. But again, all in the names of trade and cheap prices and globalization. And no price controls, of course, and the commodification of all of our basic needs. We've seen that with housing and our health service as well. And it's hugely anti-democratic in nature as well. And this is a cornerstone of this European Union liberal project, because the European Commission are not elected. The European President, Ursula von der Leyen, who's looking for her next appointment post the European Parliament elections, and we know a lot of those candidates are fully supporting warmonger von der Leyen and genocide Ursula, and that's then pushed through the European Council. But a lot of these legislation comes from big lobby groups in Brussels. There's up to 40,000 lobbyists in Brussels. Now, Brussels is also the head of NATO, incidentally enough, military-industrial complex, that we have all these big lobbyists, and the push is then to work for big corporations and to work towards more corporate stroke oligarch capture of these institutions. And this is the way it's always been set up, because if you look at the European Commission, then would get the legislation or appoint a policy, and policy comes from the key lobbyists, namely the big corporations, groups like the Brussels or Business Europe group rather. This is a big, huge group as well that provides key lobbying in this area and provides huge access to the corridors of power in Brussels. And as I said, these work on these big trade deals. 70% of our legislation comes from the European Union. It goes then to the European Council after the European Commission, which is not elected. They start the ball rolling on policy. And this is left to organisations such as the Committee of Permanent Representatives, which are the ambassadors to all the EU states, who look at policy as well from the European Council after the leaders of the European states. And they would have also up to 150 working groups. And then this works then towards the European Parliament, which doesn't operate on a veto system. And then a lot of this legislation then is transposed into Irish legislation. So you have the Irish politicians saying, well, this is a European directive, or this comes from European Union, and we have to follow suit rather than serving the interests of people. And this devolution of power has led to huge issues for Ireland in terms of losing our sovereignty, in terms of losing our independence, or losing our monetary and fiscal policy, and losing our currency as well, which is crucially important in dealing with the day-to-day crises we face domestically on a national front with all these issues as well. But we see a huge move of power away from communities, away from cities, away from towns, away from our country. And we need to take power back. And it starts at the grassroots up. It starts through communities, it starts through towns, it starts through villages, and it starts through people being central to the decision-making process. And that's why I'm standing in the next local elections coming up on June the 7th to bring power back to our communities and really cut through the absolute nonsense they try and dispel about the European Union neoliberal project, which is more technocratic in nature, moving towards totalitarianism. We see the drive towards the current digital currency also as well. And this is a bigger push towards a huger capture of power by big, technocratic, unaccountable, unelected institutions and individuals as well. And it's crucially important now more than ever, as we see this developing, that we need to be aware of what's going on. So when they talk about bringing countries together, what they really need is to work on behalf of the super rich, super wealthy, big corporations. And behind the scenes, this is how power really works. And it's been copper fastened, as I said, into the institutions of the European Union through, for instance, going back to the Maastricht Treaty, Treaty of Amsterdam, and then subsequent to the Nice and Lisbon treaties as well. We saw in Ireland with the single currency and the move towards the European Central Bank from the European Monetary Union and all these other institutions on the way towards moving towards more centralised power. We end up with technocrats like Lagarde, who's here in Ireland, who says inflation comes out of nowhere, while the profits of the super rich get more and inequality deepens in society. And migration, huge issue with that as well, because they look for what? Cheap labour. And this is part of keeping your profits high, where in Ireland you have 2 billionaires with the same wealth as 50% of the population here in Ireland. It's absolutely insane when you think about it realistically. So unless you're challenging the levers of power, unless you're putting the ideas of ordinary people's and working class politics first, you're really just moving around the chairs in the Titanic, and it needs to be addressed. And these are critical issues that needs to be spoke about, needs to be addressed when you're talking about what the European Union project is really all about. It's all about set up to serve the corporations, and that's how power really works. And the politicians will say, well, blame the European Union, blame the European Union. But yet they're all on the gravy train with their big salaries. And much the same at local levels, where you have city managers so much control, pursuing the policies on a local basis for the super rich and super wealthy as well. So thanks for joining me tonight. Really appreciate all the support on my videos. Thanks for likes, shares, comments. As I said, I appreciate it. And please press subscribe to my YouTube channel and support my work. Please share it also as well. And I'm very grateful for all your support. And from Dublin on this Monday evening, take care. Talk to you all soon. Salam. Bye-bye.